Hi, I'm Matthew Holt. It is THCB Gang back from, for those of you who've been listening to the live stream before this bit gets sliced off, the chat, which is back from my adventures in France, which included falling off a mountain bike and seeing a bit of the healthcare system as I broke a rib. And just to let everyone know, an emergency room visit in France is 105 euros, including x-ray, prescribing and everything else. I don't think the American healthcare system would be making a profit on that number. All right, it's episode 106. We haven't been here for a while because I was in Europe for 5 weeks altogether, and I missed a couple of weeks on the way back. Do have a fine gang with me to start to chat about what's going on in America. We had a small election this week. And we have with me Kim Bellard, THCB contributor and writer, Rosemarie Day from Day Health Strategies, and Jeff Goldsmith from Health Futures Inc. Mike Magee is supposed to be with us, but hasn't shown up yet. So we'll see whether or not he arrives. But the four of us will hold down the fort. If Mike pops in, he'll pop in. All right. So, hi, everyone. I hope, Jeff, you were just mentioning you tripped on a walnut and broke a rib. That doesn't sound quite as dramatic as falling off your mountain bike, but I was. No. Those who want to catch up with the mountain biking story, it is on THCB and a bit about the French healthcare system, and then also my very foolish and stupid ability to make a rash judgment early on day one of a 6-day ride to take on something that was a bit too difficult. It's not very bright, but all in the past now. Anyway, so hopefully everyone's been fine while I've been gone. Why don't we, Rosemarie, you were the person who said to me, when are we going to talk about the election? So I'm going to start with you, and you're going to tell me what you think about the election or anything else. There may be something else, but start with that.
Well, I liked one comedian's take on the supposed red wave became more of a red mirage, that basically abortion rights were on the ballot, whether they were explicitly or not, and that there was a very fired up base on the Democratic side that got some, pretty high turnout and basically overcame what was becoming an impression, I think, over the last few weeks leading up to the election. And so that was something that I had predicted, but I thought, well, I could be subject to my own wishful thinking. But having attended a number of kind of conversations and just, at the political Democratic National Committee level and others, looking at the polling and knowing as a woman just how upset so many people are about the overturn of Roe v. Wade, I thought that there was some kind of energy that was going to come into this midterm election, and I do think that was borne out. So turns out inflation is of great concern, but so are our fundamental human rights. And so people weigh and balance these things. And so we are still a very divided country. I'm sure others will talk about that. We still have some races that have not yet been declared. But I think that some folks who were worried about our democracy and some of our worst fears were not yet realized. So I'm a fan of activism and people getting out to vote. And I think it really did make a difference in the outcome here. Still to be determined in certain states, as we know.
Absolutely. Yeah, as we sit here, I think right now, the Nevada Senate race, obviously the Pennsylvania Senate race went narrowly, but for the Democrats. The Nevada Senate race is still sort of too early to call, but the Republicans in the lead probably going to win that. Same thing with the Arizona one. So we're probably back down to where we were 2 years ago, which is that runoff in Georgia again. Jeff, what do you think?
Except that the Democrats lost control of the House of Representatives. So it per Rosemarie's comment, it could have been a lot worse. But this wasn't a stunning victory for either party.
For sure.
Both of these parties are crippled by their geriatric leadership and by a huge gap between young people and their lives and the people running both of these parties. I think it's, Donald Trump, I mean, honestly, he had a quote on election day that just took my breath away. And this is somebody I've been watching incredulously for 7 years and going, what is this person doing in our public life? He actually said on election day, well, I think if the Republicans win, I should get all the credit. And if they lose, I should not be blamed at all.
The most Trumpian quote ever.
What an amazing quote that is.
When I saw that one, and I thought for the first little part, I thought he was kind of kidding. And then as it went on and on, I went, no, this guy.
No. This is a person who has badly damaged his own party. He's brought a whole bunch of angry people into it without any real outlet for the anger other than supporting him. And it's really all about him. And, it's sort of scary. I mean, you can look at this whole thing and the hints that he's going to run again and I'm going to announce the day after tomorrow. It's remarkable the Democrats didn't do better.
Yeah.
So Jeff mentioned geriatric leadership of the parties, so I have to do my favorite tidbit. So Vermont decided that the 82-year-old senator that they had was too old, so they elected a 75-year-old senator, the oldest person ever to be elected at that age to the Senate. Meanwhile, in Iowa, 89 is apparently good to go for 6 more years. They reelected Chuck Grassley. And people in Pittsburgh said, well, hold my beer. We're going to elect a dead person to Congress. So like, what else can happen? Maybe if the entire Congress was full of dead people, we would get more done.
Maybe. I mean, I was kind of amused. There's this kid who took over, young guy in his
25,
20s, right? Who won. And there you have seen these people like Biden himself won the Senate in his early 30s. And, way back when there was, who's the left-wing guy from the early 2000s who took on, didn't make it with Kerry. Dennis Kucinich was like, Cincinnati at 26 and in Congress. So you do see, and the AOC, right? And there's a very young, very right-wing woman got elected to a seat in Tampa for the Republicans. So you see the occasional one, but then you see a lot of Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi's and all these people who are just there year after year after year. And I don't know if Pelosi will quit, obviously after what happened, awful stuff that happened to her husband.
And right after her is Jim Clyburn, who's what, in his 80s somewhere?
Well, I mean,
but Steiner, whatever his name is, he's also in his 80s, isn't he?
I mean, but Matthew, I don't mean to be poking fun at your lineage or anything, but we haven't had 5, prime ministers in 8 years, all from the same party or whatever the heck it is. So, I mean, we are not alone in serious political dysfunction, but for a country of 333 million people to have these 2 political parties effectively crippled and leaderless is pretty scary, given the amount of stuff that we actually need to get done as a country.
I mean, my thought about this was that, I'm kind of with you, Jeff, on the bit, everyone's thinking the Democrat, it's a bit like 1998, right? When the Republicans thought they were going to do even better and actually Clinton had a good approval rating and they didn't do so well, but they kept hold of the House and Senate. I don't know if they kept the Senate then or not. And they didn't lose the House for another decade after that. And, a bunch of stuff happened. A bunch of stuff obviously doesn't happen. If you have the Republicans with any level of power influence, clearly less is going to get done because they don't believe in doing stuff the way that the Democrats do. So I guess I was always thinking, well, we got what we got over the last 2 years. And, I thought, although the Inflation Reduction Act was, named as a crazily named, because that had nothing to do with inflation, or maybe we'll pull down drug prices eventually, possibly in some future. But, there was a lot of stuff in that, which whether good, bad, or indifferent, you agree with it, has the potential to do stuff around clean energy and what have you. But I mean, that's probably it. I never thought we would get much more in the next couple of years anyway.
Well, as somebody pointed out, and I can't remember who, Biden's first 2 years, there were more legislative accomplishments that there were in 8 years of Clinton, and the 4 years of Obama that Obama had any legislative mandate. So, he isn't going to get credit for it. And I think, the idea that policy and implementing policy is somehow helpful to you politically. I mean, maybe it was one of the factors that reduced the red wave to a ripple, but he really did get a remarkable amount done in 18 months.
Well, to Jeff's point,
I thought he would.
In Ohio, we had a very competitive Senate race, which the Dems lost, and I live in a very competitive congressional race, which they flipped, and not a single ad talked about the legislative accomplishments. Why were they bragging? The CHIP Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the COVID Relief Act. Yep. There were some big, the Infrastructure Act. They didn't talk about them at all.
Control.
It just astounded me week after week after week.
Yeah, the talking points were supposed to be promises delivered, and I did see those on billboards like out in Western Maryland when I was there, which is pretty close to Trump country. So some candidates were going with the talking points that were, I think, really eloquently presented by Jamie Harris, who's head of the DNC. But I don't know why other candidates didn't run with that. And
the one that was missing, I thought the most, which I thought was an example of absolutely blatant election year political buying, were the 16 million people who got their student loans reduced.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, I have a huge amount of problems with what they did, but 16 million, largely young people having $10,000 or $20,000 worth of debt lifted off of them was not an insignificant political move as well. And how much of a role that played, and maybe young people turning out more. I'm really curious about whether that made any difference.
You didn't hear much about it again because they were a lot of this stuff is strange. I mean, and I think that there are lots of things that they could have done that weren't done because all the linking of the Republicans and from Trump onto I've forgotten his name. I've been out of the country so long I forgot the name. Who's the Fox News guy who with the bow tie?
Tucker Carlson.
Thank you, Tucker Carlson, and everybody else talking about linking to the Russians with all the stuff that happened in the Ukraine. I mean, I think nothing about that, even though that was on news all the time, what terrible stuff the Russians done. No attempt to link him back to that, which I think would be effective attack ads. I saw a couple of ads in. I was up in Tyler. I saw a couple of ads in the Nevada race where Cortez is. I'm blanking on her name now. Castro, right, was linking her opponent to the oil companies and trying to link him to higher gas prices and what have you. So it's like a fight about high gas prices. I know Americans are obsessed with gas prices, even though in 5 years' time nobody will be using gas anymore, if you believe me and Tony Seba. But it does seem to me that not much was breaking through. The far-right Republicans were going on about immigration and inflation as if they had any response to inflation, which they don't, as if they had any control of it anyway, because it's done by the Federal Reserve in this country.
Defunding the police, crime and inflation were the Republican attack points, and they had the Democrats on the defense the entire time, and the Democrats didn't offer a good defense. I wish Biden would have come out with a speech, a couple months ago, saying, "Guys, we're in a period of high inflation. We're, it's worldwide. It's not just the U.S. We're doing everything we can about. That will pass. But when they start taking away your rights, you're not getting those back."
Yep, good point. It really is. I mean, what scares me is the prospect that in 2022, we end up having an 82-year-old incumbent president running against a 75-year-old pathological lunatic. And that's our choice.
2024. Well,
yeah, to me, and is either party going to be strong enough to push these guys out and to get credible leaders put in their place that represent an alternative that actually looks beyond the.
All right. So are you discounting DeSantis because isn't he the emergent Republican?
What's it going to take to push Trump out?
I think even in Florida, Trump is ahead of the polls for DeSantis for 24.
Right, I believe it.
According to Trump, he is anyway. I mean, I think that there is a key question here, right? What happens regarding both him declaring at what point and how much of that's to do with money raising and all the rest of it, and how much, if there is any turn. So I saw CNN and CNBC and MSNBC and those commentators saying this is Trump has had a terrible night and all his candidates lost and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, I don't see you can say it's terrible. You still have a solid 45% of the vote for, as I've said before, what looks like from European terms, a sort of neo-fascist party, and doesn't seem to be worrying too much of that group. We still have the vast majority of the Republicans in the House, and for that matter in the Senate, happy to support him, be kind of election deniers, not care about January the 6th, all that kind of stuff. The number of people, the number of sort of quote unquote Republicans in the base or in Republican voters. Here's Mike. Mike Magee showed up a little bit late.
I'm exhausted. Somehow I failed the Zoom new something. I've been
You wait till you
struggling.
try to use Mastodon, is all I can say, Mike. We'll get on that. Yes, as
They
Twitter,
required
as Twitter
more
is
apps.
part before our eyes.
I was thrown off. I was thrown
Don't
off.
worry.
My apologies.
You're here now. We'll get it. Okay.
Well,
Hi,
I do want
everybody.
to.
It's good to see you all.
That's it.
Hello,
Where the point, just to get to Rosemary's good point, but the point, but Jeff's dead right. There doesn't seem to be, a viable alternative. And if you go back to the Democrats, right? With the exception of Newsom, who then has the complication, does he run against his fellow Californian, who's the vice president? Harris got trounced badly in the primaries, and now, yes, she'll be the vice president, but I don't know how much she's picked up at her profile. If Biden says I'm 80, whatever it is, 82, 80, I can't do it anymore, and Trump will be 78 by then, right? Something like that.
Yeah, 77.
77, 78, and maybe under indictment, may not be, maybe in jail, who the hell knows. I'm with you. I don't see a viable, strong alternative, with the exception of DeSantis, who, Trump obviously doesn't like, and may or may not pick up his supporters. I don't see an alternative on either party. It's fascinating.
My fear is not DeSantis. My fear is Carrie Lake.
Oh, really?
She scares me to death.
I mean, they both scare me to death, right? They both scare me in terms of what.
But she is so much smoother too. She can tell you you're full of shit and smile while she's saying it and make you believe that she's saying something good.
Yeah, DeSantis really does not have much of a presence on the speaking platform or in a debating setting. He's remarkably tongue-tied and not terribly convincing. He's a very smart guy and a very calculating individual. We have Glenn Youngkin here in Virginia, who before posturing to Trump's base, this is an absolute multi-$100 million wealthy technocrat masquerading as a Trump Republican. Neither one of these parties has a very impressive bench. So part of the difficulty in pushing these two incumbent leaders out is I don't think there's enough leverage to remove either of them from podium.
I'd also agree that, you think about why did Biden win, right? It's because there was nobody in the center of the party who everyone thought had the gravitas could beat Trump, and the average Democrat was terrified that Bernie Sanders would lose, who was probably the most popular early on, would lose to him. It would lose to Trump, and then we couldn't elect somebody that far left, and he was a compromise candidate. Unless you find unless he says I'm stepping down, I will groom another compromise candidate. It's going to be tough. And as he said, for the next 2 years, it's hard to imagine. The legislation is done. Maybe they get the House back, but they may. I'll be seeing if Sandra Sotomayor is ready to retire for the Supreme Court yet, because it could be a long time before we ever. If assuming they win the Senate, assuming they get back to 50-50 or 51-49 in the Senate, there'll be things like that. There'll be judicial appointments. Hopefully there'll be some other stuff, but it's hard to see anything significant happening. So what probably means is that there'll be a bunch of international and other kind of crisis things that make it worse and make it more likely that the Democrats get blamed for stuff. So I don't see another great 2 years coming. Anyway, that's my complaint. Rosemarie, tell me why we're all wrong and why we should be optimistic.
Okay. So on the scale of making incremental change, I do think it's notable that there appears to be no Republican who ran on repealing the Affordable Care Act. And that was a first. Now,
after only 12 years, they've given up.
Well, I know, but in this country, that is something. And maybe we have the pandemic to thank and the extra subsidies, or finally just wearying of it. But that was just constant. And
remarkable.
And to think that there's been the absence of it, but it kind of hasn't been noted. Now, part of me just wants to stay quiet and all right, let's just accept what we've got. But I have to say, in this very polarized environment, I will take that as a victory. And I still work with some states that are creating their own exchanges and are, little by little, it's just becoming more part of our DNA. And I do believe that we can build from there, slowly, incrementally, but I see that as a good thing. So That's one positive I'll throw in there. And then in terms of the bench, I'm a big believer in working at the state level to get some great folks, into the pipeline. And we just saw in Massachusetts, where I reside, it's been years in the making, but we now have our first woman governor elected in her own right. And we have our first African-American woman at statewide office, also elected in her own right. And then we also have a female lieutenant governor. We have a full suite in a place that really was not too good at electing women, to be honest, for decades, broke through after all this time, and are really smart and pragmatic women who are just going to get shit done. And they are not big egos, just like going and getting stuff done. So I'm excited about that in this corner of the country. I also look at Wes Moore getting elected in Maryland, and I think
That's a miracle.
He came out of almost like nowhere, unless you read his book, which was excellent. And he went from like 1% name recognition to like winning the race, first Black man to be a governor of Maryland, and I think only the third Black governor in the country. So I'll take some wins. There were also, governorships that were in jeopardy, like Janet Mills up in Maine and some other areas that were like, and Gretchen Whitmer, and they stayed in office, right?
Oregon's not over yet, but Gretchen Whitmer, people are talking her up for 24 because she won by 20 points or whatever. And it'd be very interesting to see her versus DeSantis, because it would be a quote pro-lockdown person versus an anti-lockdown person, and boy, they would play that up. So
I don't know enough about her, personally, but these are people to watch in terms of like when you think of pipeline and people who are decades younger than our octogenarians who are at the helm right now.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking, Mike, we should get you in on this, but the Trump, the Trump versus Biden thing, I'm with Jeff. I see very little way out for either of them.
Right.
I don't see a successor. Trump hates DeSantis, the obvious replacement to him. They may end up in a, Trump was almost certainly going to announce, just in order to keep himself relevant, keep the fundraising grift going, and then and then see what that does to the DOJ as to whether actually going to indict him on any of the things he's done wrong.
But as somebody pointed out the other day, becoming a presidential candidate massively complicates the indictment of him.
For sure. And
he may end up running not because he thinks he can win or that he has anything to do once he becomes president, but just to avoid going to jail.
But what does he like doing? He likes going on rallies. He likes going primaries. He likes insulting people. He'd love to get back on the stage and insult DeSantis.
Oh no! I mean, he absolutely loves being in the center of attention, having people throwing pies at him. Rosemarie, on the Affordable Care Act, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, 12 years of beating their heads against the wall. I think they finally kind of realized that it's concrete. It's not going away. But next week is actually the deadline by which the Biden administration, that has declared the pandemic over, and then they backed off, has got to announce whether they're going to extend the public health emergency beyond the middle of January. And I'm a betting man. I'm betting they don't. The estimates vary of how much the Medicaid rolls shrink. The moment states are permitted to redetermine eligibility, the numbers I've seen are from 14 to 16 million of the 89 million people that are presently on Medicaid become uninsured. Wow. So I think that there are a whole bunch of other things that happen. You lose the COVID bump in Medicare payment, you lose the telehealth payments for services under Medicare, you lose the increased match that states were given, the increased federal match that states were given for Medicaid. And the announcement of that is next week. So, we could go from, oh my God, they're not attacking the Affordable Care Act anymore, to having 15 or 20 million more uninsured people in a couple of weeks. So that's something I worry about.
So, I mean, that's interesting because Medicaid was on the ballot. Medicaid expansion was on the ballot in how many states?
South Dakota.
Just South Dakota? Mm-hmm. But it's winning there, right?
Yeah.
They
got it. I mean, the issue of how they pay for it is kind of.
Do they actually do it, right? Do they pay for it? Do they roll it out? Do they do it that's been a problem wherever they won by ballot. I think they're still in Montana that they won by ballot, and they still haven't actually rolled it out yet. But I mean, it seems to me that, grindingly slowly, the Medicaid thing is being accepted as that it should exist. But Jeff's point obviously is, do you do Medicaid like California does Medicaid, where it's basically the entire safety net for everybody and everyone's in it, or do you do it the way the South does it and decide, we don't have to include these people?
But it's important to note that most of the Medicaid expansions that have happened in the last few years have happened not because of the legislatures, but because of referendums.
Sure.
The legislatures are still stacked with Republicans that are not going to pass anything like that. So it's like with the abortion bans. It's got to come from the populace, because the legislatures are so gerrymandered that they're not going to do it.
But even when they pass, it's like a lot of things that come by about, like the felons voting in Florida, right? If the state legislature doesn't like it, and I'm sure the same thing would be true with the abortion situation, where where abortion's been not legalized, but not usually not banned completely, right? In these ballot measures in these southern states, it doesn't mean it's actually going to really increase the access to abortion on the ground. It may help somewhat slightly.
So I have a thought thing to see what people think. So I'm almost to the point that if the Republicans win the House, it's better if they win with like 225 or 230 than with 219, because if it's 218 or 219, then Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz all become Joe Manchin, and they can dictate whatever they want.
Well, it's actually worse than that. The smaller their majority, the less likely it is that a relatively moderate Speaker of the House is elected.
I'm kind of hoping
Kevin McCarthy isn't going to get 218 votes.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that they can't even agree on a speaker. That would be so hilarious.
You got Jim Jordan lurking out there. You've got, I'm trying to remember who the other person is that's kind of waiting in the wings when they shoot McCarthy down. But you could end up with somebody that used the speakership as a bully platform to rabble rouse, whether it's to support Trump.
Who's the woman from New York?
Ellen
Stefaniak.
Yeah, she could do it.
I mean, it could be Jim Jordan, right? It could be somebody who's a radical who wants. I mean, his Benghazi committee had Hillary Clinton in there like for 11 hours and had 27 hearings or whatever, and you are going to see. Obviously, I don't know what the impact of the January. I mean, we hadn't talked about this, but the January 6th committee, which was, beautifully stage managed, and as far as I could tell, beyond any shadow of a doubt, proved exactly what the hell happened on that, on that day, what Trump and all his people were up to. There are still indictments to come, maybe. I mean, obviously, there are lower level indictments. The Oath Keeper guy is still is on trial right now, and that's going to continue. Is it going to go up the chain anymore? We don't know. But to me, that stuff delivered very well. Sort of what it was.
I have to disagree.
A lot of interest at the time. Didn't seem to have any impact on moving any significant number of people one way or the other in voting.
I think they completely blew it. Up through June, I thought they were doing a great job. And if they had issued their report in September, they would have made a huge difference. Now they've lost the moment. They've run out of time. And whatever they do now is not going to have any impact. They blew it.
I do think it's a bit more nuanced, because I really talked about the abortion rights situation, but it got bundled together in Democratic talking points as the Republican extremism. And I do think that the January 6th stuff falls into the major bucket of the, Republican extremism, which a lot of kind of regular folks, many of whom are not registered in either party. Remember, vast majority of folks are independents. They don't like the extremism. So I think it kind of infiltrated the psyche, but the Dobbs thing may have come out more dominant, but I do think it was still there.
So Mike, we haven't given you a chance to talk yet. You've been on for 10 minutes. What's your take on what we just saw?
Who's that? Me?
You.
Yes, you.
My take is that I cut some slack to a variety of people at this point, mainly because of the culture that is America. And the culture that is America is they love to be entertained. That they are used to a massive feed of entertainment. And my theory is that they get down on Biden, even though this guy is a experienced practitioner of politics, experienced. And by any measure, ignoring his face on TV and the way he communicates, he's an experienced practitioner, knows how to get legislation through, knows how to manage complex things like Russia, Ukraine. The guy's been around a long time. If he were a doctor or a nurse with 30 or 40 years experience, we'd be kissing his ring because he has judgment and he's a practitioner that's experienced. Similarly, I think with Trump, I've always said with this guy, he at some point was going to bore us. And once you bore Americans, they dump you. And he's not immune to that. And the guy is really now getting boring. So when you can begin to voice before he does what's going to come out of his mouth, you know he's burnt out. So my theory on Trump is whatever he needs to do to protect his money and try to stay out of jail, he's going to do. But I think, you know, he's going to cause trouble. Not to say that. He's going to cause trouble for the Republican Party because they deserve it and they dig the hole that now they've got to figure out how to try to get out of. But basically, he's not going to lead anything. You know, he's on his way out because he's bored us. Similarly, with the ACA, I think, you know, the reason the ACA is okay now and fairly safe is that people got tired of fighting it. And they just got bored with the whole thing. And the Republicans just walked away from it. It was too damn boring, you know? So I'm kind of hoping that this boredom factor hits the right people, like, like Lindsey Graham. That guy should be boring by now. He's such an ass, you know? He should be boring. So why he still has any entertainment value, I don't know. I think maybe it's because there's such a mystery around his private life that, you know, people are still curious what makes this guy tick. But at the core of it, I don't think anything makes him tick. I think he's just a jerk. So once we fully realize that, he's going to become boring. So if you want to know what happens next, you got to look around and say, okay, what's interesting in this crowd? Who's worth watching? And right now it's hard to tell because we're all kind of shell-shocked from the actual election. But in a week or so, it'll become obvious who you want to watch or not. Carrie Lake may be gone a week from now. And so even if she was interesting to some people, she may not be available unless she comes out in some other form. But there are probably a few people on all sides of the aisle who could interest us. I just can't name any of them right now.
Me neither. I mean, I think there's a real
I love what you said about entertainment, right? Because Robert's opponent says it was angertainment.
I mean, but it isn't just that there aren't a lot of interesting people. There's not a lot of interesting narratives that people can pick up to get our attention. So
now Wes Moore, I agree. That Wes Moore story is a hell of a story.
But I think part of the deal with the ACA is people just got bored with the repeal and replace or whatever the hell it was.
I love the thesis because we are like the country of Hollywood, and that's what we export to other countries. No question about it. But I also do think that a heck of a lot of people would have pre-existing conditions who were protected by the ACA, whether they got subsidies or not. And then we had COVID, and anyone who had COVID could be declared as having a pre-existing condition. And so that is now off the table as an issue. Right. And I do think that I
got to say too, Rosemarie, your new governor, faced off the trial lawyers and, almost lost all of their support because she wouldn't give them the windfall from the opioid settlement that they wanted. So that was pretty courageous of her to do.
She's tough.
She still won.
Anybody who plays professional basketball is only 5'4", but figures out how to develop some competitive advantage by doing finger push-ups is somebody not to mess with.
I'm not as confident about the ACA as you are, because once the expanded subsidies go away, which, Jeff, does that happen if they declare it no longer an emergency?
No, I think now the ACA ones, they were in the Inflation Reduction Act. I think are they
Well,
permanent or are they just good for another 4
No.
years?
I think they were just through this
Like 2
cycle.
years.
So next
It's
year.
like 2 years, yeah.
So people are going to fall off then. And the Republicans, if they get power, will be happy to just tweak it so that healthy people can pay lower premiums. And then that'll lead to the old death cycle thing. So I'm not, all they have to do is undermine it. They don't have to repeal it. They just have to undermine it. And that's not too hard to do.
Well, I mean, I think the narrative of and you saw editorials in the Wall Street Journal about this before the election. What are we doing putting all this money into, quote, welfare? Well, a lot of what they were talking about was Medicaid. We have almost 90 million people on Medicaid. That's like, 27% of the population. It's a huge target. Nobody loves Medicaid. Even a lot of the people that are on it don't love Medicaid. The hospitals don't love Medicaid. I mean, it's a great, big, extremely important, unloved program.
So, Jeff, do you think that's going to get transitioned into some other existing brand, or you don't think they'll just stop it, right? They got to put it someplace.
Heck no, no. What I was talking about, maybe it was before you came in, was that when the emergency expires, states will be able to redetermine eligibility for Medicaid.
Right.
And there's anywhere from 15 million plus folks that if you ask them right now, all at the same time, do you meet these income thresholds? Are you in these categories or whatever the heck it is? The answer is no. So, we had a record, and Rosemarie, it's 8% is the lowest percentage of uninsured people we've had since any of us have been basically following this issue. That 8% relied a lot on the emergency powers in the law, and the ability to afford it relied upon the 6.2% increase in federal match that was included in, I think, the CARES Act. It was really early in the process.
Right.
Mike, the strategy doesn't have to be to repeal it. They will block grant it. So they'll just give the states some money and give them the freedom to tweak the benefits, tweak the eligibility, and just suck it dry.
That's
not going to happen. That's not going to happen for 2 years.
Not going to happen.
What Jeff's talking about now is when they could happen straight away, right? Or could be delayed. I think it'll be delayed another 6 months. I think it's too soon. But But
you could never see enough power and experience on a federal level being able to pull a move where you opened up Medicare participation to Medicaid participants.
There's huge overlap now, Mike.
Yeah.
There's 8 or 9 million people that are duals.
Right.
So what? That are duals.
So what I'm saying is, what if you were a governor of a state whose Medicaid was not pulling its own weight financially, and you were offered an escape valve through Medicare? Would you take it if you were a Republican? Would you
go along with that idea?
I mean, I'm with you, Jeff. It's an interesting idea, Mike, but you're not going to get it, right? There's no way there's going to be enough federal. There's no way there can be, especially with federal legislation.
You don't think Republican governors would rise to that bait?
Well, I think they take it, but no one's going to bait them with it. It's much more likely. It's much more likely we end up with, not much for the next 2 years in terms of the structure of Medicaid, in my humble opinion. But if we get a Republican president, and who knows what, with then another Republican head of CMS like Seema Verma or someone like that. She was doing a bunch of stuff which was undermining Medicaid, right? The work requirements and that kind of the waivers and all that stuff. To me, that's tricky. The interesting part is I think the real bit we're going to find more interesting is the stuff. And this is the stuff that George Halverson's been talking about and others is for the Medicare Advantage plans, which are taking care of the Medicaid dual eligibles, so the SNPs, I think is the right term. The SNP
programs.
That's interesting as to how this all plays out, because a lot of the CMS did change. This is the one non-election thing we maybe have to talk about. CMS did change the star ratings, which has now, which I think were allowed to go on during the pandemic and now have been changed. And there's going to be a significant reduction in funding for some of those Medicare Advantage plans, including I think some of those SNP plans, and whether that can, I think Aetna. So CVS Aetna said it was going to be a material change to their revenue coming up.
Yeah, but I don't think we've seen the end yet to, for example, the abortion issue, initially, they said, okay, this is going to be an issue of who supports abortion and who doesn't, and 70% of Americans support abortion. But what did abortion rapidly became? It immediately became an issue of women's autonomy and women's right and freedom, right? But what is it going to be next? The next thing, and it happened during this election, you could feel it happening, that there was it went from being abortion to being women's health to being health. Okay. And so it went to, you cannot be free. You cannot be in charge of your own destiny and potential unless you have health. So I could see the abortion issue sticking around, not as abortion and not simply as a women's rights issue, but as a human rights issue. I think you could morph that. You could drive that right through as a human rights issue. And if you're willing to take it that direction, then you're moving, straight on into a universal health movement.
Well, I mean, you could argue I mean, it's a bit of a jump, but you could argue that Shapiro, right, the guy who just won Pennsylvania governorship, is basically going down that path with this. You got a freedom, it's like the Republican right-wing caucus call themselves the Freedom Caucus when they really want to stop other people doing stuff, but as long as they're free to have their guns. But I mean, you could argue that, and go back to Pennsylvania, was Harris Wofford, 1991. Everyone should be able to have a doctor, right? And that you could see this sort of thing coming, but it runs into the 40. It runs into a Republican. Yes, it was a good night for Democrats, but they still lost. It was a moral victory.
Well, if rolling forward the scenarios a little bit, I mean, suppose we do get a recession between now and 2024, who gets blamed for that? And what happens to the political climate in the country if the inflation doesn't go away? And we end up with stagflation and 5 or 6% unemployment. There's going to be a lot of angry people out there looking for somebody to blame. And who's better at fostering bogus blame narratives than our friends on the right?
Well,
I don't think. I mean, we can argue all we want about Trump. I mean, Trump is Trump. He's probably, per Mike, he's not interesting. Maybe go away. But 73 million angry people voted for this dude in 2020. 73 million people that were pissed off enough and connected with Trump's anger to do something that, frankly, didn't make a lot of sense. That anger isn't going anywhere. And I'm a lot more concerned about all those angry people who feel like they're sliding backwards, who feel like the world is against them and that, people are cutting in line in front of them, than I am about these pathetic politicians.
Well, perhaps there's competing angers because, again, and this has been documented in a book called Good and Mad by the journalist Rebecca Traister. When women have shit taken away from them or done to them that they don't want, they will get up and rally and do some things, including exerting their political influence and push back on things and hopefully push forward. But there have been when that happens, and this abortion thing isn't going away. Like, Roe return until there's like a national law passed, which it looks like that won't be in the offing if Congress turns over. That doesn't go away. I mean, you talk to the people who are like the grandmothers who are out there saying, I don't want to have to fight these battles. I mean, that is real. This is what gets people off the couch, out of their house. It's anger of a different type. And it is real.
And then
I put that together with the healthcare, like Mike does. I mean, because as I put in my book, women make 80% of the healthcare decisions in their home. So if you start to go after the pre-existing conditions or your disabled child or any of that, look out. So that has to be reckoned with.
No, I think the obvious target are the poor, the immigrants, the people that folks feel, my costs are going up, I'm paying all these taxes, and it's going to help these people that are not worthy economically or morally, whatever. I think that's where the real division is.
It seems that way.
All the exit polls show that the strongest base for Republicans are white men without a college degree. And the other
over the age of 50.
40% of Latinos voted Republican. So both of those are bases that were once heavily Democratic, and they've lost those votes. And the Democratic Party has not figured out how to get back to them.
Right, but well, I'd watch the Latinos, but that share on the white male side, that's a dwindling number relative.
Yeah, but the Hispanic one isn't growing, and the idea that you can assume that Hispanic people think of themselves as a quote minority, and we're people of color, and the Democrats help people of color. I think that narrative is increasingly questionable.
Yeah,
and I think people like DeSantis played this very cleverly. A great big chunk of DeSantis's victory was, getting sort of enterprise oriented. We got ours. We worked hard. Whatever, Hispanic folks to vote for him. So I think this idea that there was some kind of historic inevitability, the old white men are going away, young people love Democrats, people of color love Democrats, it's just inevitable. I don't think that's inevitable at all.
You can't paint Hispanics with one broad brush.
No, I agree. I agree. But I mean, but I think a lot of Democrats did in fact paint them with one brush. And they assume, Democrats have historically been on the side of the disadvantaged, and we're disadvantaged. I don't think a lot of Hispanic folks think that way.
Well, somehow the Republicans have convinced these underprivileged groups or these working class groups that they're their party, and they do nothing for them. But the Democrats have not countered in making the argument about why they should be voting Democrats. They're not making
I think, true or not, I mean, the Democrats have in general abandoned rural America. In general, listen, there's a couple of interesting articles this week about people in heavily Republican districts in going door to door and trying to do something and getting no support from their local parties when they're not running a 50 states strategy. They haven't done for a long time. Obviously the Republicans haven't, but both the Senate math and the Electoral College math and now the gerrymandering. Well, the gerrymandering where it was done well in Florida and the gerrymandering where the Democrats screwed it up in New York, is on their favor enough just to tip over the House. So if you look at,
we'd all agree though that the major battles are still engaged, right? I mean,
let me finish and I'll come to that. Let's finish on that.
Yeah.
So I was just all I'm saying is that you've got all this going on. The Hispanics, yes, the Hispanic vote is still up in the air. There's still a very low voter participation amongst even legal Hispanics. You don't have a flood of immigration the way you've had. Not flood. You don't have a large amount of immigration the way you've had in the last, in the last few decades over the last 5 or 8 years. So that's starting to change stuff. But overall, you've still got very, yes, we can argue that it's a dwindling number of old white men over 50. Well, there are 4 of us on this call, but we're not, it's dwindling very slowly. It's 1 year at a time, and it's not like everyone's in their late 80s. It's kind of like the Brexit vote where it was all old people who voted for Brexit. If you didn't ran the numbers again now, 6 years later, it probably would tip over just because of the way people have died out. But we're not there for a while. We're not going to be there in 24 by any means. So you can see that this thing is going to play out. Now, having said all that, let me get to Mike's question. The thing that I'm fascinated about is what happens to abortion plus women's autonomy plus health plus whatever in the next 4 years. Because as Rosemarie says, Dobbs is Dobbs. Roe v. Wade is gone. There, even though there have been a bunch of ballot measures which, didn't ultimately stop the complete banning of abortion in some places, there are 15, 20 states now where it's essentially illegal to get an abortion. There may be more after the court cases all play out. And there's no chance of a Republican House codifying Roe. So this issue is going to sit here for 2 years. What does this stay? Does it get worse? What happens? Do we do anything about that for the next 2 years? And how does that impact on stuff? Or does it go away?
Well, there was a quote floating around that Goldwater made when Falwell and Robertson were coming up as televangelists, which was derogatory toward them. And basically what he was saying is that these people, because they believe that God told them to do something, they're going to keep doing it to the point where they're going to drive us into the drink. So that was a long time ago that he predicted that that's exactly what would happen. So that battle hasn't gone away. That battle is still fully engaged right now. And that's just one of multiple battles, whether it be, hyper-capitalism or whether it be forcing women back into the corner somewhere, or whether it be God told me to do it. All those things are still in play. The question is, who is so motivated that they will not get bored? And having had contact with a few, for example, on the religious side that are hyper engaged, I know that those members of my extended family are going to keep running with this crazy issue. They're not going to get bored. So a certain segment of that Christian nationalist population is going to keep going. A certain number of misogynistic, brutal men will continue to try to push women down. And a certain number of hyper greedy Americans will still try to disadvantage anyone they can if it'll put a few pennies into their pocket. So the bigger question for me is, okay, I know those guys are not bored, but is there a large enough group that's tired of the battle that they're going to look towards sort of some common ground just to get the fringe people to shut the hell up, because you're boring me,
And we haven't talked about, economic pressure, but there are stands that people can take. You can say, where should, company headquarters or what you decide to purchase or not, whether you decide to stay on Twitter. I can't believe we've made it all the way through this without even talking about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
But it's not just the political pressure, right? There are other kinds of pressures that can be brought to bear. And if people are feeling really frustrated and stymied, there are other avenues they can take in the next several years that could get the more reasonable business people to put the pressure on state government, for example. There's going to be a lot of avenues explored here in this post-Dobbs world.
But Rosemarie, answer my question. What do you think the impact of the energy that came out of, you mentioned the grandmothers worrying about their granddaughters having to grow up in a world where it's free as they are, and all this bodily autonomy, female autonomy stuff, and women's rights is human rights, all that kind of great stuff, right? There was a lot of energy in the summer about it. Obviously, there was a decent enough on election night to do something, to at least to bring more people to the vote. Where do you think that goes, and what do you think that does in the next 2 years? Because given that not much is going to change, right? You can't see a legislative way to get Roe put back in. The states that I think Pennsylvania and probably Michigan now will have will have states legislation to promote it in their states, but.
When you look at the map, I mean, if you think about a geography, like if you live in Texas, there's nowhere you can go like within a day's drive. I mean, you have to get on a plane. If you need to get an abortion, we are going to have some absolutely horrific stories. So even in the states where women are protected, these stories are going to continue to come forward, and they're going to be horrifying. And so the energy, I don't think, is going to go away. Yes, there may be people need to take a rest or what have you, but until the fundamental issue is resolved, I do think that there will be people who stay keyed up about this and ready to do whatever the next thing is that leaders are going to be strategizing around. And we'll have to, it's going to need to go through the court system, economic. There's a lot of different avenues that are going to be explored, but it's not going to go away.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm back to what are the mechanisms by which it actually changes? The Supreme Court stands athwart the process. And you're going to have a 50-50 Congress where one party is going to control one house and another is control the other house. I mean, I don't see any meaningful way short of ballot measures of moving the needle on this issue. I mean, just from a process standpoint. And we end up with two countries. We end up with a country where women have some degree of autonomy and control over their lives and bodies, and another country where they don't. And I think we're headed towards the whole two countries thing in a lot of other ways as well. So I'm not sanguine about this. I don't see the unification that needs to happening here. I don't see the dynamic that rewards unifying the country and eliminating some of these absurd divisions politically. I don't see it.
Well, there may be a pragmatic.
Sorry, Kim, then Mike.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We have the small states with outsized political influence. We have gerrymandering that, effectively, again, gives rural counties much more power than, it's hard to see how we're going to overcome these blue-red divides. And, I live in a state where you got a couple large urban areas and the rest of it is all red, and the red people dominate everything, every aspect of state and federal government. I want to go back to Rosemarie's point, though, like corporate political pressure in Texas, Georgia, and Florida have proven to be non-existent, and in fact, DeSantis has weaponized it. So he's proven, he goes against woke corporations, and he's not afraid to take on Disney, for heaven's sake. So, like, I think corporations are going to be very wary about trying to, fight against this stuff.
Mike?
Well, when I look at the abortion issue, one thing for certain is clear through this election cycle, and that is that Republicans got burnt badly wherever that issue came up for an actual vote. Yep. And the professional practitioners in the Republican Party know that. Yep. And so what do they want to do? They want to get that issue off the table, because every time some nutty member of their party brings it up, they're going to get burnt again. So already I've heard several of them, the more moderate ones, say, you know what we got to do? We got to focus on that third trimester. I think there's middle ground in that third trimester where we could all agree that, going ahead and allowing this is not right. Now, of course, with Roe v. Wade, that's exactly what Roe v. Wade did. Basically, by the time you get to the third trimester, you had a lot of obligation to demonstrate that what you were going to do in proceeding with the abortion would not inadvertently harm the child. That was the compromise. The mid trimester, they still gave most of the decision-making to the doctor and the patient, but you had to justify it. The first trimester, not at all. But that third trimester, the state was right there looking over your shoulder and say, prove it, because they recognized by then that they were dealing with two organisms that might have competing interests. So, but what I'm saying is, from a practical political standpoint, I wouldn't be surprised if the Republicans tried to get out from underneath this issue completely by seeing if they might strike some sort of a compromise with Democrats on a national level that essentially would redo Roe v. Wade, but make it sound like they weren't redoing Roe v. Wade.
That sounds rational and very implausible to me in today's America. All right. We are nearly at time. So real quick, go around here. You can give me a forecast for anything you like, including whether who's going to win in Nevada, or is Boba going to keep her seat or have to go back to Hooters or wherever she was. Shooters, not Hooters. Sorry. Well, I think that restaurant will close down. So real quick, go around. What do we think? What are you looking forward to? What are you looking at in the next week or two? I'll start with you, Jeff.
Well, I mentioned it earlier in our talk, and that was the extension of the emergency. There is a non-incremental set of harms that happen if that emergency isn't extended politically and culturally. The emergency is over. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of vulnerability here and a lot of risk for our friends in healthcare.
Kim.
I'm especially interested in what happens in Arizona, governor, secretary of state, and senator, because all three of those choices would be disastrous. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Mike.
I think Wes Moore kind of tipped his hand that he's going to emphasize benefits. So it's not simply job, it's benefits that go with job, which once you strip away all the veneer of it, that is moving toward more of a social welfare kind of a state than simply paying somebody for a good day's work. And I think also that is woman and family friendly. So I would expect benefits to be up front in the future.
Rosemarie.
I look forward to the fallout from, I guess, Trump's exciting announcement that's coming up.
Yeah.
I do think that could have some influence on the Georgia runoff.
Mhm.
Well, I'm of course looking most importantly at the World Cup, which is starting in the soccer hotbed of Qatar, a place which had to build their own stadiums. And I was still a bunch of people now, focusing on it, saying this is shocking, terrible. The World Cup should never have been given there. And I did see one commenter on The Athletic saying, "You're saying that the next World Cup, you know where that is? It's here. It's in America, but a little bit in Canada and Mexico as well." Saying, how could you give the World Cup to a country which doesn't give women any rights?
It doesn't like
Good
soccer.
question. So maybe that's going to be taken away again. All right. So we'll be watching England plays Iran, not this coming Monday, but the Monday after that. And for those of you fascinated in the special relationship, England plays the US the day after Thanksgiving. So there you go. All right. So we are done. I want to thank my guests as ever. It's been a fascinating conversation about politically fascinating and perhaps terrifying election. My guests were Kim Bellard from the wilds of Cincinnati, Rosemarie Day from the now very matriarchal town of Boston, Jeff Goldsmith from still on the fence in Virginia, and Mike Magee from Connecticut. I'm Matthew Holt, your host. Really appreciate you spending some time with us, whether you're watching live or listening on the podcast. Now we're back. We will be back for the rest of the year. And as things go here, I will actually be at the health conference, the big HLTH conference in Vegas next week, doing a bunch of speaking interviews. I'm interviewing the chief medical officer of Walmart and the CEO of Scan Health Plan on stage next week. It'll all be good fun and games, and we'll see whether digital health. Apparently, there are 10,000 people going. So digital health may have lost a lot of funding the last year, maybe laying people off. But apparently, maybe the last hurrah in Vegas. We shall see. I'll report back from that. We will see you this time next week, next Thursday, November the 18th. We'll have the THCB Gang. But for now, thanks for listening and thanks for watching.